About 11,000 years ago, the Earth went through a period of massive change that forever reshaped entire continents. Before this, our world looked much different. England was connected to Europe, Australia was connected to New Guinea, and Antarctica had an entirely different coastline altogether. In fact, it may have actually been green, and it's likely that people lived there. Our story begins in ancient Greece around 340 BC, with Aristotle's writings in his text titled Meteorology. For reference, at the same time period, Alexander the Great was his student. China was in its warring states period, and the Olmec civilization in Central America was declining into obscurity. Aristotle was the most intelligent man of his time. In this meteorology text, he determined based on winds and climate patterns that he lived in the northern hemisphere, and that there is a large landmass on the South Pole that he called Antarcticos, later dubbed Terra Australis by early explorers, and then Antarctica in 1840 by a Congress of Italian scientists. But our earliest maps made by these explorers don't depict Antarctica as it looks today. Actually, they show it as it looked during the late Pleistocene, just before what is commonly known as the Younger Dryas Period, from 13,000 to 11,000 years ago. Scientists tell us that about 20,000 years ago during the Pleistocene period, which ended with the onset of the Younger Dryas, the Earth reached its glacial maximum, and sea levels were much lower than they are today. Something close to this glacial maximum occurred again from about 13,000 to 11,000 years ago, when the Younger Dryas mini ice age caused the planet to rapidly cool due to some unknown cause, most likely an impact of some sort or a solar flare. Except this time Antarctica didn't freeze over. It actually did the opposite, which scientists call a cold reversal. The continent had already been warming for about 7,000 years since the glacial maximum. But during the Younger Dryas period, this process turned extreme. The glaciers quickly receded, causing the landmass to jettison its coastline further due to the post-glacial rebound effect, only to be plunged back underwater when the glaciers in the northern hemisphere began their rapid melting around 11,000 years ago, or 9,000 BC, when the Younger Dryas came to an end. But for this roughly 9,000 year period from 18,000 BC to 9,000 BC, Antarctica wasn't covered with ice. It may have actually been green, and its coastline reached as far as South America, and came much closer to areas like South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia. The research into the degree Antarctica warmed and expanded its coastline is still ongoing, but the average temperature is thought to have been somewhere around 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. This would have created an environment on these now sunken coasts where greenery and life could have been present, and would have created easy travel to and from the continent. Actually, there were many coastlines that were greatly extended, and huge parts of other continents that were exposed as dry and fertile land at this time of the late Pleistocene and Younger Dryas as well. The area between England and the rest of Europe, known as Doggerland, would have been above sea level and would not fully submerge until around 6500 BC. The area between Alaska and Russia, known as the Bering Strait, would have had much more exposed land and frozen ice caps, creating the land bridge we're told the Siberian and Mongolian tribes used to migrate to the Americas during this time. A large portion of Southeast Asia, including the Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and other islands, were connected as a continuous landmass during these periods as well. And many other coasts around the world at this time were further out than they sit today as well, creating the massive number of ancient sunken cities we find off coasts today. And early historians, explorers, and map makers at some unknown time charted these coastlines. Our oldest maps show Antarctica exactly as it would have looked with lower sea levels. How could they know exactly where the coastlines would be? They would have had to map the seafloor to figure this out. Or, the coast of Antarctica, much like many other areas of the world at this time, was greater than it is today. And at some point, someone in the ancient world went there. Take a look at the Piri-Reis map. This was created in 1513 by Ottomans by compiling much earlier maps. Most of it has been lost, but a small section has survived to the modern day. And it clearly shows the coast of Africa and South America, but South America looks much different. The bottom tip flares off into the Atlantic Ocean and connects to a landmass we only see the very coast of. And this is exactly what the coast of South America and Antarctica would look if sea levels were lower or after the post-glacial rebound effect that caused the rising of the Antarctic plate. This is exactly what South America would have looked like around 13,000 to 11,000 years ago. But how would they have possibly known this? Unless someone in human history went there and recorded it. Someone who created the maps that Piri-Reis was looking at when he made this one. And we can see that all maps from the 16th century showed Antarctica as a huge landmass, oftentimes with greenery and creatures inhabiting the shorelines. Because they were based on the same ancient maps that Piri-Reis based his off of. It's almost as if early mapmakers would use their knowledge of cartography to draw the Old World, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and then go off of ancient maps that are over 10,000 years old to draw the Americas, Antarctica, and Australia. It's even said that Columbus used these now lost maps to find the American continents, and the earlier unknown explorers had been traveling to and from the Americas long before Columbus and the rest of the world, including Antarctica, possibly going all the way back to the late Pleistocene and Younger Dryas Period 12,000 years ago, when Antarctica actually looked like this. But who were these lost ancient explorers, and why aren't we told about them in our history? Well, if they were depicting Antarctica as it was during the late Pleistocene, it would only be possible if they were that ancient as well. And we need to look no further than the mythology of almost every ancient culture around the world to find such travelers. I covered many of these hidden lands spoken of in Greek, Chinese, and Buddhist myths and legends in my last video. I'll link to that in the description, but stories like that of the island of Hesperides, Buddhist land of Shambhala, the legend of Atlantis, Lemuria, and others may very well be referring to Antarctica. If this land was green at this time, it would have been difficult to get to, but it would have been plentiful and possibly had a sparse population. The rapidly changing ocean currents may have even made some areas temperate or even tropical. Mythological characters across various civilizations were also said to travel to distant lands that have never been identified in modern archaeology. Characters like Poseidon, the father of Atlantis, said to be able to traverse the entire ocean with ease in his chariot carried by 2 hippocamps. Or the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl in the Aztec and Toltec was thought to have arrived on Mexico's shores from a far-off land to bring knowledge and civilization to the people in a long-past ancient age. Or in the Hindu texts where the gods could travel around the world in the Vimanas. The Egyptian gods were also said to have traveled great distances when the goddess Isis set out to find the body parts of Osiris that Set spread across the ancient world. And many gods were said to bring the gift of cartography and teach the people map making. Some ancient civilizations like the Phoenicians, Egyptians, Norse, Pacific Island cultures, and others kept this sacred knowledge of exploration that they learned from the characters in their myths and religions, and discovered land that we wouldn't reach until the age of exploration. But what was on Antarctica during this era of folklore and myth? Was it really the Garden of Hesperides, or the sacred land of Shambhala, where the gods resided? If we look close at some of the more detailed maps, we can find clues into what types of creatures inhabited this land, or at least what early map makers believed was there, and possibly what these ancient maps that have been lost to us showed as well. The Period Reese map itself, which we know to be based off older source maps, shows very interesting creatures. It shows some deer and bovid-like animals, and even a large snake, possibly correlating to certain species that were alive during the Pleistocene. Paleontologists have not found a deer-like species, but do believe that it very well may have existed in South America during the Pleistocene. And we know giant snakes to exist in South America, of which reached gigantic proportions in ancient times. Here's the Urbano Monte map from 1587 that was almost lost to history in pieces, like the Period Reese map. But in this case, the pieces survived in private collections only to be brought together in the 21st century. But they show images that are absolutely eerie, because they were the creatures of the late Pleistocene, and some even earlier. During this time, around 11,000 years ago and prior to that, South America had creatures like giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, short-faced bears, large birds like the elephant bird, giant condors, and large raptor species, several kinds of elephant-like animals and mammoths, horses, giant armadillo-like monsters, and a species known as toxodons. And this map from 1587 shows several of these spot on, and even several species that should have been extinct for millions of years. And it depicts the Antarctic coastline region as green and full of life that is nowhere else on the map, like extinct animals, and exact drawings of what we know today to be dinosaurs, but what they called dragons. And near the South American region, it shows elephants, giant birds like the elephant bird and terror bird, and giant condors. It shows the connecting landmass and more bovid creatures like we see on the Period Reese map. And it even shows the giant sloths and the toxodons, as well as the Ankylosaurus, whose fossils have been identified in Antarctica, and the Edaphosaurus, or the Dimetrodon dinosaur. Also giant crocodilians, giant apes, massive insects, and other weird dinosaur-like creatures. How would they have known in the 16th century of the existence of these extinct animals? The fossils of these animals would not be found until the 18th, 19th, and even 20th century. But here's a map from the 16th century showing their existence. Further along the map, we find that the Antarctic region is filled with characters from various myths and legends, alongside real animals we know to have actually existed. We see centaurs, giant cavemen, cyclops, griffins, men riding on the backs of weird water creatures, mer people, and sea monsters, some of which may be representing real species that are around today. This looks like the mapmaker was trying to depict this land as an area where the Greek myths took place, where the otherworldly and mythical creatures lived, where the gods, the explorers of our early history, were the only ones who could get there. The possible location for Atlantis and other lost civilizations that every ancient culture held knowledge of. The Garden of Eden, the Island of Hesperides, Asgard in the Norse and Germanic, Dilmun in the Sumerian, the city of Krishna in Hindu texts, and Kunlun in Chinese mythology. The land where the sun comes from, where the sun god originates. In the late 1800s, British-American antiquarian Augustus Le Plongeon came up with the theory of a lost continent, somewhere to the west of Mexico, when he translated the Maya Madrid Codex and the Popol Vuh text. He claimed the Maya spoke of a since-sunken continent, where the gods lived and first created man, and where man eventually spread out from, reaching lands like Mexico and Egypt. This also aligns with the Aztec and Toltec traditions that say their creator god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, arrived from the Aztec paradise land of Tlalan. The Aztec god was said to travel on a raft of serpents over the ocean, and ruled over this mythical land, where life was said to originate and where gold was more plentiful than iron. And the early explorers during the Age of Exploration were certain they would find this land of gold and advanced civilization off the coast of South America. They followed legends spoken of by nearly all natives across the Americas. One story that comes to us from the first African explorer in the Age of Exploration, known as Esteban the Moor, tells us of his shipwreck in Florida, where his entire crew was killed, but he was left alive. A native tribe living in Florida found him and brought him to what he called the 7 cities of gold. He then went on to waste the rest of his life trying and failing to find this city of gold again, only to be killed by the Zuni in the southwest deserts. And nobody ever found evidence of these mythical 7 cities of gold. Another explorer by the name of Álvaro de Mendaña de Niera was convinced by natives in South America that a land of gold exists somewhere off the coast of Peru. He believed this was the lost gold of Solomon, who was said to have sourced the largest amounts of gold in the world at the time from the land called Ophir, which has never been definitively identified with any existing place. Álvaro de Mendaña de Niera claimed to have found this city of Ophir in the Solomon Islands, but although they do have large amounts of gold here, it doesn't quite constitute a city of gold, like the natives in the Americas claimed. And then of course there's the well-known legend of El Dorado, which comes to us from a tribe in Colombia. Maybe these tribes knew that some sort of great civilization once existed to the south of them, and connected with the continent at the Strait of Magellan, where they could freely travel to and from Antarctica and reach this mythical city. This would have been where the giants of Patagonia came from, which are also on the Urbano map, in both South America and Antarctica, and other maps from the 16th century as well. What are we sure existed in Antarctica at one point? From the Pleistocene, we don't have many fossils. Fossils take very specific conditions to be created, and most remains break down instead of being locked in mud or sediment. But foliage from the Pleistocene proving that greenery existed at this time has been found. These include wood as well as vegetation that definitively existed in these warm areas in Antarctica as late as 9000 BC. But more exploration does need to be done. Other fossils that have been found are those of the Cryolophosaurus, a large theropod dinosaur with a distinctive head crest, as well as the Antarctopelta oliveroi, a species of Ankylosaurus. They've also found long-neck herbivore dinosaurs and various other theropods as well, many of which may have had feathers and look similar to some of these unknown giant bird-looking things on the Urbano Monte map. This proves without a doubt that Antarctica was very green across possibly the entire continent at one point in its distant past. This greening and freezing of Antarctica may have happened hundreds of times throughout recent geologic history. There are even stories of marine dinosaur-like cryptids still existing in different isolated pockets of Antarctica, such as in the underground lake in the coldest region of the continent, Lake Vostok. But what everybody really wants to find are the ruins. The daily sub-zero temperatures and extreme storms make it the most challenging place on the planet to do archaeological work, as well as the most expensive. In reality, less than 1% of Antarctica has been properly studied archaeologically. All we have are the high peaks of mountains sticking out from the snow and ice. And on the sub-Antarctic islands that don't quite freeze over all year round, mysterious unexplained pottery fragments have turned up. That in one of my previous videos I speculated might be from the Maori. But I have since learned that the Maori didn't make pottery. However, civilizations that predate the Maori that lived in areas like New Zealand and Tonga did. And if they traveled as far as the sub-Antarctic islands, which these pottery fragments prove, they could have very well made it to mainland Antarctica, and may have even settled there when the climate was much warmer. Some of the tall peaks have been theorized to be huge pyramidal structures, built by these advanced civilizations due to how perfectly geometric they look. And we know ancient cultures like the Maya, Inca, and other tribes would terraform entire mountains, turning them into temples with pyramidal sides and perfectly cut edges. The possibility of ruins and tools being found under the ice are high when we consider this warming period during the late Pleistocene. Even if this was not the land of the gods, we would still be likely to find primitive tools and more pottery fragments or stone structures built by primitive man. Travelers from South America, Australia, and New Zealand would have had a much easier time getting here. Really, anything could be found here. There could have been an entire unknown civilization that thrived here separate from the rest of humanity. And many of these ruins might not be under the ice, but under the water. Maybe with LiDAR scanning or advances in technology, we can discover these lost cities. Or maybe these secrets will be revealed when the ice caps finally melt. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. Go check out the Patreon for more stuff. I've started uploading these videos there so you can watch them ad-free. Also, here's 2 more videos to check out if you liked this one.